Okay.
Yeah. Our Earth has been evolving for millions of years, and I don't think it needs to be saved.
More volume.
Maybe it's our way of life that needs saving. I want to know the right thing to do, and I want to share some things I've been thinking about, including the history of Vermont agriculture and the use of fossil fuels and electricity. Are humans going to use up all the planet's oil reserves someday? I want to know what to be prepared for, and I want to be happy. Will using less energy cost me money or time? I'm concerned. Also, will I have to give something up? Wait a minute, I use oil to heat my house in hot water. I hadn't thought about how much I use oil for my home. Is our way of life based on achieving happiness driven by greed? A recent study claims that $75,000 a year can buy happiness, and income beyond that won't improve your daily mood. This survey studied two forms of happiness: day-to-day contentment and a satisfaction with your place in the world. Do lenders make money by amassing financial claims on borrowers? And does our economy survive because of spenders? I'm an artist. I don't make a lot of money. And I want to make enough money to make ends meet. Every morning I wake up in a panic thinking, what am I doing? I should have a job. I need money. I wonder what the real cost of that money is and how much of our natural resources and energy would a full-time job consume. Okay, there's two parts to my brain. I'm having a conversation about this with myself. Maybe I have a good or virtuous side and an evil screw-it-all side. But there's a third part to my brain, the limbic region, responsible for emotions, fight, flight, freeze response. Now there are three sides to my brain telling me what I should do. It's too confusing. Transition movement believes life without oil could be more enjoyable. And it could be seen as an opportunity rather than a threat if we use our creativity to design a future that's sustainable and abundant. In Putney, that means lots of gatherings and learning new skills and getting to know my neighbors. Rob Hopkins, founder of Transition, will now show you something amazing.
Which is one of the great marvels of the modern age. And there's something so astounding and so astonishing that I think maybe as I remove this cloth, a suitable gasp of amazement might be appropriate. If you could help me with that, would be fantastic. This is a litre of oil.
Within the last 100 years, we've discovered oil and electricity and then based a whole way of life around it. This timeline represents 400 years of agriculture in Putney and Vermont and a history of electricity and fossil fuels. The first commercially available automobile, the Model T Ford, was built 100 years ago. People began using electricity in the 1920s, and it was first in the barn. 100 years ago, Putney had 80 farms with about 12 cows each. Butter was the main dairy product. At that time, farms began producing fluid milk and shipping it to Boston on the train. Farms on better roads modernized and flourished, but farms on small, steep roads declined or shut down. My mom... Let's see what happened here. I think I messed up here. Wow, the automobile and electricity changed how we live dramatically in 100 years. How do people live without it? That's a picture of my mom, the face of one generation. She was born in 1924. Model T was still being built, and it was also the early days of electricity. She remembers getting her first refrigerator in 1941. Today, she's 86. She would have been 4 years old when this picture was taken in 1929. Horses were still used for farming. Model T Ford and the industries that developed because of it changed how we live dramatically. My dad, William Lazar, is now going to read an excerpt from Farewell, My Lovely, a story written
I
in
see by the new
1936.
Sears Roebuck catalog that it's still possible to buy an axle for a 1909 Model T Ford. But I am not deceived. The great days have faded. The end is in sight. Only one page in the current catalog is devoted to parts and accessories for the Model
That's Putney
T.
pizza right there.
Yet everyone remembers spring times when the Ford gadget section was larger than men's clothing, almost as large as household furnishings. The last Model T was built in 1927, and the car is fading from what scholars call the American scene, which is an understatement, because to a few million people who grew up with it, the old Ford practically was the American scene. Springtime, in the heyday of the Model T, was a delirious season. Owning a car was still a major excitement. Roads were still wonderful and bad. The Fords were obviously conceived in madness. Boys used to veer them off the highway into a level pasture and run wild with them as though they were cutting up with a girl.
That's George Aiken. Springtime for the automobile has come and gone. Tom Wessels, in his book, The Myth of Progress, claims our economy based on inefficient use of resources runs contrary to scientific laws that govern natural systems. Our global economy, based on ever-expanding economic growth and dominated by large corporations, create inefficiencies in material and energy uses that are not sustainable. This summer I joined the Putney Community Garden, a project of Transition Putney. I grew things I would eat or paint. I learned a lot about growing food from other gardeners and local farmers. It was a lot of work. I set myself a challenge to eat all the produce I grew, and it takes a lot more time and effort than going to the grocery store. The 20th century saw the largest legal accumulation of wealth in history, a pattern of wealth now, philanthropy later. Slow Money's mission is to get companies to invest in local communities instead of trying to show huge profits, which would make our communities healthier. Woody Tash wants to develop financial products and services for investing in local food systems. Tom Wessels' research describes how the most energy-efficient species survive. If we're going to thrive beyond peak oil, will we need to find ways to become less dependent on oil? I think we are more influenced by the person to the right or left of us than we'd like to admit. We take our cues from each other. How do we get people to accept less and feel okay about it? The other day my son said, "Dinosaurs must have been so inefficient. They obviously use so much energy." I made him repeat it because it seemed to express exactly what I'm trying to say. Although I guess we have the age of the dinosaurs to thank for all the reserves of oil we're using now. We all have a choice. If we make less money or use fewer resources, it may not make us happy, and it might not be good for business. The Transition Town movement connects community members with ideas about how to gracefully move beyond the way we live now. We all have an opportunity to deeply inspect the ways in which we live our lives, the types of work we do, and how we value that work. During the break, I put up the timeline. It's over there. And my mom actually sent me a letter last week that had a list of all the things, what life was like in 1909. And she actually included a couple of things about what it was like for her life. Well, she wasn't born yet, but what my grandfather would have been like. And I also brought some pesto with me and some crackers that I'll put out over there that came from my garden.